Hey guys, Matt Larosiere here with Firearms Policy Coalition, and we're here to talk about the hot mess that ATF just left us with, that frame or receiver rule. We're still hard at work looking at different angles of attack here, but for right now I just thought it would be helpful to put out a broad strokes view on what ATF is trying to do here. So let's take a look at some of the things the rule is trying to do, what it's not trying to do, and what the practical effects might be for you. The final rule, which will take effect in about 120 days, targets a few different areas. The big one that most of us are concerned about is about incomplete receivers and privately made firearms. First up, what the rule does do. It redefines frame or receiver, taking it from a short statement into a multi-page long cross-referenced mess while invalidating all previous determinations regarding unfinished receivers. As it applies to unfinished firearms, the definition includes partially complete, disassembled, or non-functional frames or receivers. This definition, which is what we're most concerned with right now, is as cleared as dried mud. It all hinges on whether or not it is designed to or may be readily made into a functional receiver. Of course, readily has its own definition, which hinges on whether or not it is fairly or reasonably efficient, quick, and easy to do. Yeah, so much for clarification, right? We're looking more into this, of course, but for right now, it's totally up in the air as to what ATF thinks is a firearm or not. ATF did write that a partially complete receiver alone is not legally a firearm if it still requires performance of certain machining operations, but the inclusions or possession of jigs and tools apparently upsets them. I think it's interesting to note that ATF considers its definition so vague that it found it necessary to specifically exclude unmachined blocks of metal, liquid plastics, and other raw materials from this definition. Yikes. While the rule does nothing to ban the homemaking of firearms, it does require that any FFL who has a privately made firearm in their possession for more than a day serialize the firearm. FFLs holding your homemade firearm for less than a day for minor repair and adjustments, though, do not need to mark them. But if they keep it overnight, it looks like they need to install some kind of serial number plate. As for what is and is not a frame or receiver going forward, let's just get this straight out. No, AR uppers are not firearms under this new rule. ATF has stated that all prior classifications of which part concerns the receiver or frame on existing firearms are grandfathered for those guns and their variants, including the AR-15. This means that pretty much all guns up to now, what is the receiver and has been considered the receiver, gets to stay that way, unless of course the ATF says otherwise. As for new designs though, it's a different story. The new rule defines frame and receiver separately, with frame covering handguns and receiver covering long guns. For long guns, the receiver will be that part into which the bolt locks into. So if the AR were a new firearm, it would be the upper. For handguns, it's the part which contains the mechanism that holds back the striker or hammer. So it'll be the thing you grip in your hands on virtually every self-loading pistol, or the trigger cassette like in the SIG P320. And of course, on revolvers, it is the frame. This new rule does call into question the legal status of parts kits which were sold with receivers that were not completely melted, shredded, or otherwise destroyed in a method approved by ATF. As for FFLs, which for decades have been able to destroy records of firearms transactions after a certain number of years, the final rule requires that they keep these records indefinitely. The purpose of this, many are concerned, is to enable ATF to amass a searchable database of gun owners by making it so that ATF has access to all future transactions that will ever be done through an FFL. Additionally, it states that suppressors will now have a frame or receiver of their own, which cannot be an end cap. It also sets up a new way to mark firearms, which is required for marking privately made guns and usable by manufacturers and importers going forward using an abbreviation of their FFL number. This whole thing is, of course, an absurd overreach. But now let's talk about what the proposed rule does not do. It does not, at present, appear to require serialization of AR uppers. It does not seem to prevent 3D printing of firearm frames or receivers, and it does not seem to outright ban home building. It does not seem to require separate serialization of uppers and lowers, as the previous draft threatened to do. On that much, it's clear that all of the hard work you guys did in commenting on the proposed rule was helpful, but it's just as clear that we've still got to fight this overreach any way that we can. So what are the practical effects? How is this likely to affect you? Again, FPC law is still looking into this, but for right now it seems that 80% frames or receivers that are sold with templates, jigs, or otherwise reasonably easy to complete may disappear from the market if something isn't done. We'll see a huge issue also with FFLs who hold on to a privately made firearm for more than a day, suddenly being required to mark them in compliance with this new vague rule. And of course, you'll see us fighting back against this absurd administrative overreach any way that we can. Administrative agencies do not have the power to write new law, and just look at what ATF is trying to do here. It's trying to replace a single word with a multiple-page cross-reference definition complete with sub-definitions. Whack. If you want to help out, visit stopatf.org. Until next time, I've been Matt Larosiere. Take care.